Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. Thus ended week 1 post-marriage. She'd missed visitation on Wednesday night to get her apartment unpacked and set up. When I offered her the week starting tonight, she declined so she could finish getting settled in. She promised to be here on Wednesday, right? I nodded. She's just trying to make her place nice for you, little man. His face said he didn't really believe me. Hey, I said, deciding that now was the time to spring the surprise on him. You still want that dog? His face lit up. You mean it? Sure, I said. I had been wondering for a few months how to get Kyle excited about life again. He'd always wanted a dog, but Whitney had always refused, and I had never cared. Now that it was all over and Kyle wasn't getting any better, I knew it was now or never. What kind of dog? He asked, tossing his book on the floor and crawling up to me, his face a wide-eyed bundle of excitement. I don't know. What kind do you want? I don't know, he said, his hands now on my shoulders, pinning me to the couch. Well, why don't we start looking around tomorrow? I suggested. That'll work, he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up at the thought of a dog. He hopped off the couch. Where are you going? I asked. Next door to tell Tyson. I'll be back in 15 minutes, he called as he ran out the door. I didn't realize it at the time, but the next day would bring some significant changes to our lives. We were up bright and early the next morning. Actually, Kyle was up early and doing his best to get me moving along as quickly as possible. Settle down, I said with a mouthful of toothbrush. But Dad, he said, standing next to me and combing his hair. The kid had a thing for neat hair. You promised. Nothing's going to be open for a while, little man, I said, rinsing the toothpaste from my mouth and spitting it into the sink. Yeah, but nothing, I interrupted, rubbing scalding water on my cheeks to soften the stubble for my shave. We'll have some breakfast, then we'll start searching for the perfect dog. Fair enough, he said, running out of the bathroom to parts unknown so I could finish getting ready. By 1, we'd been to 2 pet stores in Rockford and the Winnebago County Animal Shelter. None of the dogs had excited Kyle all that much, so we decided to stop for lunch at the Grant City Tap before driving over to see if the Lincoln County Animal Shelter was still open. We had just ordered some burgers and sodas when Kyle waved at someone behind me. It's Miss Palmer, he said. Your teacher? I asked. Uh-huh, he replied. I turned around and nearly fell out of my seat. 2 women who looked like sisters were waving toward us and smiling. I managed to raise my hand back, but I knew it came off as a feeble effort at best. One of the women whispered something to the other, and they both grinned in unison. She's pretty, isn't she? Kyle said. I thought she was old, I said, turning back to him. Still, he agreed. She's pretty, even if she is old. Which one is she? He looked back at them, smiled and nodded his head, then looked back at me. She's the one in the pink shirt, he said. Who's the one in the pink shirt? I heard from behind me. Hello, Kyle. Hi, Miss Palmer, he responded, his face lighting up. I looked up at her sparkling eyes and bright smile. I was asking him which one was his teacher, I said. Kristen Palmer, she said, holding out her hand. Luke Patterson, I said, taking her hand and shaking it. She was gorgeous, and I could see why Whitney had mentioned her being the head cheerleader type. She looked like she could still be in college. Her face was oval and unlined, with bright eyes and an upturned nose. Her lips were expressive and mysterious, like she was thinking something about you that you could only hope was what you were thinking about her. Her light brown hair was cut short, framing her features perfectly, and her posture exuded health and confidence. So you're the famous Professor Patterson, she said. It's an honor. I chuckled. Just Luke, and I'm not so famous. I don't know about that, she said. Kyle piped up. We're looking for a puppy. She looked at him, and a softness came over her face. I realized she adored children. You could see it all over her. What kind of puppy are you looking for? She asked. Not a clue, I said. We were just going to have some lunch and go to the animal shelter to see if they've got anything there. Sounds like a plan, she said, just as the waitress arrived with our burgers and sodas. I'll leave you men to it then. Happy hunting. I watched her walk away. See what I mean, Dad? Kyle said, turning to me. Pretty, huh? I had to force myself to keep my eyes on him. Sure, I said. I guess so. We were almost done with our burgers when Kristen reappeared at our table. Sorry to bother you, she said. I tried to finish chewing and gulped down my mouthful of food. No bother, I finally managed. It's just that I was talking to Allison, my cousin over there. She says she knows someone with a litter of puppies. There are 3 left. What kind of dogs? Kyle asked eagerly. Pugs, like from Men in Black, Kristen replied, grinning widely. Where do you see Men in Black? I asked. At Tyson's house, Kyle said, then turned back to Kristen. Those are the ones. Yeah, she said, smiling. They're the ones. Who's the friend? I asked. Tim and Nicole Franklin, she said. They own the bar and grill. I nodded. I'd been there a few times and was pretty sure I knew the owners by sight. They were about my age, and their kids helped out around the restaurant. Good food, I said. So Allison knows them pretty well, she said. You want me to give them a call and see if it's all right for you to drop by? Where do they live? I asked. Out on 7 Oaks. I looked at Kyle. Well, let's go see them, Dad, he said, his half-finished burger and fries now pushed to the side. If it's not too much trouble, I said to Kristen. No problem, she said and walked back to her table. I noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Dad, Kyle whispered, you're staring. I turned back to face him, a lopsided grin on my face. His eyes went to the heavens. I left the money on our table, then stopped at Kristen and Allison's table on the way out. Have a seat, Allison said. I don't want to interrupt, I replied. I'll go with you, Kristen said. Show you how to get there. They're expecting us in about half an hour or so. Allison said we've got time to finish our lunch, I said, looking from one to the other, amazed at the resemblance between the cousins. I could tell them apart, but they were both stunning and shared a spark in their eyes that made them captivating. We all watched Kyle giggling on the lawn as 3 puppies, none larger than a gerbil, climbed over him, licking and nipping at him. They all like him well enough, said Nicole Franklin, laughing. That's for sure, her husband added, his arm draped over her shoulders. They were easy together, comfortable and happy. It struck me as a devoted couple, and a pang of longing shot through me at the sight. I caught Kristen looking at me, and her expression mirrored my own. Gone was the playful smile and sparkling eyes, replaced by a sardonic smile that hinted at her own past. What do you think? I asked her. I think you've got a choice to make here, she said. I nodded. The male, I said to Tim, if it's okay. I think we'll take him, I added. Problem with women, Allison teased, but Kristen shot her a glare. Something passed between them in a split second, turning Allison's look into a forced smile. That's great, Tim said. Let me go get you a crate to take him home in. That's not really. I started to protest, but Tim cut in. You've never bought a puppy before, have you? Nope, I replied, laughing and shaking my head. Per sucker, Tim joked. Don't talk him out of it yet. Nicole chimed in. I'll get us some beers, Tim said, walking toward the garage. I'll tell you all about how to train a puppy and take care of him. I started to protest again, but Kristen spoke before I could. Sounds good, she said, her eyes on me as she said it. They were eyes that said to sit down and relax if I knew what was good for me. I decided not to argue with that. A half hour later, I felt more comfortable with my newfound knowledge of how to care for a puppy. The most basic lesson I learned from Tim and Nicole was simple. I was in for a busy time for the next 6 months until the tiny pug was older and trained. I'd be juggling raising a puppy alongside my own son. I know what most of you are thinking. What did you expect? To tell you the truth, I hadn't thought about it at all. I had never had a dog before, and Kyle's interest had never been pursued when Whitney was around. The look on Kyle's face as he played with that tiny ball of fur told me there was no going back. He hadn't looked this happy, this full of joy, in months. I've never seen him like this, Kristen said, walking up beside me and watching Kyle play. I sighed. Yeah, it's been a while. She put a hand on my arm, and I turned to face her. Hang in there, okay? I know what you're going through, and it's tough. I wanted to ask how she could know, but then I remembered her own complicated marital history. I couldn't recall if Whitney had mentioned it, but I suspected Kristen had children of her own. Either way, it was clear she understood how difficult this was for me and Kyle. "Thanks," I said, "for everything." I looked back at Kyle, who was rolling around in the grass. "Especially for this." "No problem," she replied. The Franklins had given us enough food to get us through the night and into the next morning. We also had a crate for the little fellow to sleep in until we could get to the store the next day for all of the puppy-raising essentials. So Kyle and I enjoyed ourselves in the backyard when we got home. "What are we going to name him, Dad?" he called out from the yard. I pondered the question as I flipped the barbecued chicken and corn on the cob roasting on the grill in front of me. "Well," he said, scooping the little black-faced bundle of tan fur into his arms and walking to the deck. "You got any ideas, little man?" I was worried the squirming little pup would break free and fall, but Kyle kept a solid hold. "Not really," he said. "I was thinking of a general or something, like the stuff you're always reading about. Like General Lee." I shook my head. "No, he's Chinese." I corrected myself. "He's from China, and things from China are called Chinese." Kyle ignored me. "So, are there any famous Chinese generals?" I searched my memory, discarding most names that came to mind. "How about Sun Tzu?" "Who's he?" Kyle asked. "Thousands of years ago," I answered. "He was a famous general who wrote a famous book." "What was the book called?" he pressed. "The Art of War," I said. "It's still famous today." "Still used?" he asked. "Yep," I grinned. "And we can call him Sonny for short." I ran my fingers through the puppy's fur and scratched behind his ear. "Sonny it is," I agreed. School for me started the next day. Not classes, but an endless series of meetings to prepare for the upcoming semester. When the afternoon meetings ended, I found myself in my office behind my desk, flipping through resumes to narrow down the finalists for my 2 research intern positions for the semester. They were paid positions, though to be honest, the pay was quite low, and the competition was fierce. More than 40 students had applied, representing about 2/3 of the seniors majoring in history or related areas. After an hour, I had narrowed it down to 3 finalists who would be interviewed the following morning: Randall Meeks, Jeremy Scott, and Heather Farley. I know what you might be thinking about Heather, but you'd be mistaken. Aside from being incredibly attractive, she was a solid writer and researcher, making the dean's list every semester so far. Her looks were just a bonus. I phoned the 3 of them to arrange interviews, and then gathered some books and notes into my briefcase before heading home. "Look," I heard from behind me as I unlocked my car door. Turning, I saw Doug Morey running up behind me. "Wow," I said, taking in his now clean-shaven face and slimmed-down figure. "Looks like the summer's been good to you." He grinned. "Time to get off my butt and make a go of it again." "Sounds like a good plan, man," I said, trying to maintain a pleasant smile but failing. His eyes narrowed. "Where you at in it?" "It's over," I said. His eyes widened. "So soon?" "Yeah, a couple weeks ago," I replied. He nodded, his face clouding over. "I got Kyle. Joint custody, but he lives with me." "You're kidding." I shook my head. The house was mine, so she didn't get any of it. Our incomes were close enough, so there was no alimony. I let her keep a hidden 401k, which was really why there was no alimony, and the rest was 50/50ths. He gave a bitter chuckle at that. "Told you that Rebecca was good." "She was," I said. "So thanks, really. I would have been clueless." "And she may have been he began, but I knew what he meant. "Tell me about it." "Hotter than hell," he added, and we savored our own thoughts for a moment. I looked him up and down. "Looks like you're finally getting past it, though." "I finally met someone," he said, his head bouncing as the grin returned. "She's great." "Do I know her?" I asked. He shrugged. "Maybe." I laughed. "What is this, middle school? You want me to pass her a note in homeroom?" "You'd better clue me in," I pressed. "We'll see," he said, turning to leave me standing there. For whatever reason, that was the first time I felt hope, that it would get better and somehow return to normal. Doug's divorce had been brutal, and he had been down in the dumps about it for a couple of years. But now he looked a lot more like the easygoing, happy guy I hadn't seen in 3 years or more. He'd finally gotten over it, and it seemed to bode well for me. For the first time, I believed what everyone said. Someday, I'd get over the anger and regret and return to being happy. Of course, I thought as I pulled into my garage, Doug hadn't been spending all his spare time as a single parent to a little boy and his even littler puppy. Heather Farley arrived for her interview, looking very professional, with her legs crossed primly and the appropriate look of academic seriousness on her face. She wore navy blue slacks and a long-sleeved white blouse. "What would be your duties as you understand them?" I asked. "Research and memos," she said. "Whatever topic you assign, I'd be responsible for researching it thoroughly and then preparing and submitting a memorandum that encapsulates the salient points." Encapsulating the salient points, I noted. There was a legitimate reason why she was a finalist. She was much smarter than most of her peers. Jeremy Scott had shown up for his interview in jeans and a t-shirt, while Heather presented herself much more maturely. "You've spoken to past interns?" I asked. "Absolutely," she confirmed. "And you know you could probably work for Professor Whitman." I countered, "It would certainly be far more prestigious on your resume for graduate school." "True," she said, "but you'll soon be Dean of History, so that won't matter." I leaned back in my chair. "And how do you know this?" She gave an enigmatic smile and a brief shrug. "I just know." I stared at her, but she didn't flinch. The look on her face told me she was serious, and that shocked me. I had been in meetings on and off throughout the summer, and no one had mentioned the retirement of Hubert Whitman, a colossal figure at Chadwick who had been teaching there since my parents were in diapers. Sure, he was well past retirement age, but most of us agreed they'd be carrying him out of the school in a casket, and that was as it should be. He was still sharp as a tack and had more energy than many professors half his age, so the thought that he was stepping down seemed far-fetched. "Fine," Heather finally said. "If you want to know, I'll tell you, but this stays between us, okay?" I nodded. "He told me Professor Whitman himself. I already interviewed with him yesterday, and while he offered me a position, he still recommended I meet with you. This may be his last semester, and he says you're likely to be the one taking over. Is he okay?" I stammered. "I mean, he's not sick or anything?" "Not that I know of. He seemed fine to me, same old Professor Whitman." I nodded. "And he already offered you a position?" She snorted. "If you want to call it that. It would mostly just be cleaning up his papers and sorting things out, a career's worth of notes and that sort of thing. That's why he recommended I meet with you instead. He said most anyone could do it for him, and I shouldn't pass up the chance to actually get something out of this." I looked at her, then down to her resume, and back to her again. She raised her eyebrow, waiting for my decision. "Fine, you're hired," I said. The professional demeanor melted away, replaced by a schoolgirl-like excitement. Intern positions could make a big difference in graduate school applications, and the higher up the professor for whom she interned, the more impact it made. This was a significant opportunity for her. "Thanks, Professor," she said. "You won't regret it." "Really? Now I'd like your opinion on the other two finalists," I said. "Mr. Meeks and Mr. Scott." "Meeks," she said immediately. "Jeremy's way smarter, but he's lazy. Randy's a hard worker, a better writer too. Jeremy will try to skate by, but Randy will put in the effort." I nodded. That was my assessment too, almost to the letter. The problem with Jeremy Scott was that he'd never had to work for his grades. Everything had come easy to him, and he wasn't used to going the extra mile on anything. "Well, Miss Farley," I said, pushing back from my desk and standing as I reached my hand across to her, "welcome aboard." She pumped my hand in response. "Thanks, Professor." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "I'll need you here tomorrow morning by 8:30. "No problem," she smiled. "What are we going to work on?" "Don't know yet," I lied. "We'll know tomorrow morning." "Fair enough," she replied, then gave a bright smile before walking out of the office. It was going to be a challenging semester if I had to focus while she was around, I thought, adjusting my posture once she was gone. At 5:30 on Wednesday, the doorbell rang. "Your mom's here," I called into the backyard before going to answer the door. "Hi," Whitney said when I opened the door. "Come on in." I motioned with my head, stepping aside awkwardly. "Hi," she said after a moment, her voice low and her eyes on the floor. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her complexion looked pale. Her hair seemed dull and lifeless. "You doing okay?" I asked, lifting her chin with my hand. She looked up at me with a blank stare. Sure. You don't look so good, I noted, looking around the living room, now stark and half empty after our property division. You need some new furniture. Probably, she said. I'll go shopping this weekend while Kyle's with you. She paused, then nodded. Hey, Mom, Kyle said, running through the kitchen toward her with little Sonny doing his best to catch up from behind. What's this? She said, leaning down and pulling Kyle into a tight hug. Kyle squirmed with the pressure of her squeeze and managed to break free enough to scoop the bouncing puppy into his arms. Isn't he great? Kyle said, holding up Sonny. She looked at me, then back to Kyle and the puppy. Son, Sue? We call him Sonny. Kyle held him out to Whitney, who took the wriggling little creature into her hands and stared at him. He's adorable, she said, smiling. Really cool, Kyle insisted. She handed Sonny back to Kyle, who made faces at the dog before holding his cheeks closer to Sonny's face for an endless series of playful licks. So, he finally got his dog, Whitney said, her eyes staying on Kyle and Sonny. It's helped, I said. I see that. We watched for a moment longer, but the silence soon became uncomfortable. Well, you two best be going, I prompted. She turned to me, vacant-eyed. You'll have him back by 8 or so? Somewhere around there, I replied. Give him here, I said, holding out my hands to Kyle. He transferred Sonny to my arms, then turned and took Whitney's hand. So, what are we going to do? He asked his mom as they walked out the door together. I didn't hear her response, preferring to close the door behind them. I held Sonny up and looked into his sparkling brown eyes. What are we going to do, huh? His yipping response told me our plans had better include dinner. Has either of you ever read this? I asked, sliding one copy each across my desk toward Randy Meeks and Heather Farley. Claudius by Robert Graves. They picked up their copies, looked at the cover, then flipped to read the book's description on the back cover. Never heard of it, Randy said, pushing his glasses up before running his fingers through his tangled hair. Me neither, Heather said. It's about Claudius, a Roman emperor who died in 54 AD. And we're going to be researching him? Randy asked, confused. I preferred military history, and he must have had visions of researching some great historical battle. I shook my head. Not Claudius or the others for that matter. No, I want you to read the book and tell me what you think we should be researching and writing about, something that hasn't been covered in great depth, I said. Based on that, Heather asked, looking at the book again. When do you want it? Read the whole thing by Tuesday and get me a memo on your recommendations, each of you, and don't work together. So, you want our own ideas? Randy asked, showing no apparent aggravation at being asked to do this over the Labor Day weekend. Precisely, Mr. Meeks. I want you both to read it and come up with a new angle on the transition period from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, any aspect of that transition. This book, while not strictly history, can at least be useful in showing you how many things happened in history that we don't really teach or even know about, for that matter. He shot a glance at Heather, but she was already reading the first page of the book. Well, I'll leave you both to it, I said, waving them off. Randy rose to leave, but Heather stayed, still absorbed in her reading. Miss Farley, I said, and she looked up, her concentration broken. Yes? You don't have to do it here, I said. You can probably go back to your dorm or apartment or whatever and work on it there. She frowned, then shook her head. If it's just the same to you, I'd rather stay here. My roommates are back and getting settled, and I'll never be able to focus. I suggested the library, and she smiled, revealing a bright set of teeth and sparkling green eyes. This place is fine. Randy looked from her to me, and then back to her again. She had already slouched back into the chair, reading. We exchanged glances, and he smiled, shook his head, and left. Tuesday then, he said on his way out. By 3 p.m., my last faculty meeting of the week was complete, and there was still no word about Professor Whitman and the potential vacancy for Dean of History. I was hesitant to say anything to anyone or let on that I knew something might be up. The other professors, Whitman included, seemed to be going about business as usual, as if there were no changes on the horizon. Still here? I said upon entering my office. Heather had moved from the chair and was now behind my desk, scribbling notes on a piece of paper. Aha, she said, not bothering to look up. I watched her, amazed. It was clear she'd finished at least most of the book by now, which was no small feat given her frantic writing pace. It was also evident that she had a wealth of ideas for research projects. Can I have my desk back? I asked, tossing my briefcase into the chair she had been sitting in when I left 2 hours earlier. In a sec, she said, finishing her writing, underlining a word 3 times, then looking up at me. Wow, she said, her face a mixture of wonderment and amazement. How have I never heard of this book before? Good question, I responded, walking behind the desk to look at her notes. They contained a series of perceptive questions. It's a classic, I mumbled. One of the top works of the 20th century by almost anyone's reckoning. Really? She said, wheeling my chair back and hopping up to snatch the notes away before I'd finished reading them. It's really, I don't know, inspiring, I guess, to think that you can do something like this with a topic like that. Like what? I asked. Roman history. Professor, I mean, come on. Have you ever studied anything so incredibly dry and boring in your life? Before I could respond, she threw her arms around me in a friendly hug. I froze, startled for a moment, but quickly reminded myself to relax. This is going to be so much fun, she exclaimed. I cleared my throat, trying to regain my composure. Fun, I agreed. She winked at me, confirming, tons of fun. Then she slid the book and her notes into a backpack, which she slung over her shoulder. Same time tomorrow? I tried to find my voice but struggled. She took my silence for a yes. Till then, she smiled. Toodles. With that, she sashayed out the door, her confident stride evident. I didn't really feel like going back to the office the next morning, despite the presence of my beautiful coworker. Instead, I decided to get 2 spare keys made for the office, one for each of them, and left them with Sarah, the secretary, bright and early the next morning. With a 4-day weekend now ahead of me, I spent the morning browsing for living room and master bedroom furniture ideas online. A few things that should be exceedingly obvious. First, I'm a guy, so I could care less if my furniture all matches. Second, I'm a guy, so I don't really know what decor is to begin with, let alone how to match any of it. Third, I'm a guy, so shopping for furniture ranks right up there with flat beer and colonoscopies on my list of things to avoid. Pardon the pun. To that end, God bless the internet. We have a few furniture stores in Grant City, including those in the shopping mall on the edge of town. Rather than wade through the shopping throng for hours, I decided to get some ideas up front, make sure they were in stock, and get it all done without hardly leaving the house. 2 hours later, I realized I was in over my head. Apparently, furniture fabrics, styles, and colors are all written in a secret code that only women can understand. I, who can speak 2 languages and read 4, English and Spanish, plus Latin and Greek, if you're curious, simply couldn't decipher what they were describing. The pictures helped somewhat, but not much. With a sigh, I gave up. Sonny was sleeping in his crate in the corner of the den, his soft snores, grunts, and occasional dreamy yips barely audible yet strangely soothing. I decided to check my email and then take a nap before Kyle got home. I had 4 emails. Heather and Randy both emailed that they had finished reading Claudius and hoped to have their preliminary notes to me by Monday morning. I replied that Tuesday was fine. The 3rd email offered to introduce me to the wonders of a medication at a low introductory rate, which was a bit insulting. The 4th email, though, made me wish I had saved the other offer, as it reminded me of the past I was trying to move on from. The message was from cldlawlink.net and was titled Saturday. I clicked the message, not knowing what to expect. I know you're still mad at me, it read, but I really wish we could move past all of that. What's done is done, and there's no changing it now. Now that the dust has settled, I was wondering if you wanted to have a drink together or maybe even dinner. There's no reason we can't still be friends, or more. Just like that, all the pain of the past 5 months came rushing back. I knew I would see Whitney with other men eventually. We were both moving on, and it did no good to pretend otherwise. But this was different. This was a reminder of that great unanswered question. What had happened to my marriage? Reading the message over and over, I could glean no clues to help me answer that question, but I now had an email address to investigate if I wanted answers. I sat back, tense, trying to decide whether to dig deeper when another thought occurred to me. How had this email come to my inbox? It was actually sent to the email address Whitney and I used to share. The answer came almost immediately. Whitney had opened another email account, one with a name close to our own. I logged out of my email account and went through the login procedure again, typing patterson1123link.net. I stared at it for a minute, then added a 4 at the end, making it patterson11234link.net. I typed in my password. Any password would work, but it gave me an invalid email address message. I deleted the 4 and stared at the screen. It had to be close enough that one extra letter or number, or one less, would result in the email coming to our regular address. 5 minutes later, I had it, patterson1123link.net. That little underscore made all the difference. Now that I had a valid address, it was time to figure out the password. I tried everything: her name, my name, Kyle's name, middle names, parents' names, maiden names, anniversaries, old phone numbers. Nothing worked. The message was always the same: invalid password. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 3. Kyle would be home soon. Then my eyes drifted to a small brass nameplate, a paperweight I had gotten for Whitney when she won her first jury trial, Super Lawyer. I remembered giving it to her, recalling her excitement as she placed it in the center of her desk all those years ago. Now it sat dusty and forgotten on a shelf in the corner of my den. I wondered how long it had been there and how long it had been since she had taken it out of her office and brought it back home. Turning back to the screen, I typed it in, Super Lawyer. The second attempt, with all lowercase letters, worked, and I was in. With one click, I accessed the history of undelete messages, and I stared at a list going back 11 months. Dad! Kyle called from the front door, slamming the door behind him. In the den, I shouted, highlighting the whole list and clicking print. Hey, Dad, he said, steamrolling into the room and straight for the crate. Hey, Sonny. The pup was already awake, standing and yipping at Kyle, his tail wagging furiously. Come on, Kyle said, opening the crate and running back out of the den, Sonny hot on his heels. I glanced at the list of emails being printed, then back at the door Kyle had just run through. I clicked on a message dated March 19, 2010. The evening Kyle and I had stayed awake eating pizza and watching movies, while Whitney remained silent on the couch the whole time, just a few hours after I had told her I was going through with the divorce. I know this is tough on you, someone had written to her. You've been so unhappy for so long, and now you're feeling guilty and sad about the state of your marriage. I wanted nothing more than to hold you close today, to embrace you and share a tender moment together. I understood your confusion and the difficulty you faced in finally leaving him. Just remember how happy we will be together. You, Kyle, and me. I want that more than anything in the world, and I know you do too. We'll be the happiest family when that day finally arrives. I thought about how she had seen him that day, but it didn't seem like anything intimate had happened. Not then, at least. The email implied they had been together before, but when I read her response to CLD law, which was from the next morning, it was clear she was going through a difficult time. He told me yesterday afternoon that it's over, she wrote. Luke is divorcing me, and we are telling Kyle today. I don't know what to do. Last night we ate pizza and watched movies until Kyle fell asleep across Luke's lap. You should have seen them. They were so peaceful and content. As I watched them, I realized one thing. You and I don't have anything like what Luke and I have, and we never will. I don't know what I've been doing for the past 2 months, but it stops now. I do not want to see you again. Dad, Kyle called from the doorway, breaking my concentration. What's wrong? I asked, trying to smile. Nothing, he replied. Just let me put this away, and I'll come out and play with you and Sonny, okay? His face lit up with joy. Hurry, he said, running back outside. I locked the emails in a drawer, then headed to the backyard to join Kyle and his friends, who were all playing with Sonny. The poor pup seemed ready to burst from the excitement of having 5 energetic kids chasing him and throwing things for him to fetch. He looked exhausted from all the love being showered upon him, and I envied that carefree energy. It's a good idea, Doc Sally said from behind me. It's taken his mind off things, that's for sure. She placed a hand on my shoulder. It'll all get better, you know. It'll take time, but it will. I put my hand over hers. Thanks. No problem, she said, reaching around and pressing a cold can of beer into my chest. Now come on, it's Friday night. We both drank our beer and chatted while watching the kids run Sonny ragged. Did you feed him yet? Whitney asked, shouldering Kyle's duffel bag as she came in shortly after 6. No, I figured you'd want to take him out or something. Probably just something quiet back at the apartment, she replied. It's been a long week. Tell me about it. Classes start next week. I nodded, not really wanting to engage in small talk. She knew classes always started immediately after Labor Day, and she knew Kyle had asked where Sonny was the second she walked in. No furniture yet, she said, her eyes lingering across the great room and kitchen. This weekend, I said, turning away from her. Kyle raced back into the room, stopping at the couch before he came to us. Sonny was sprawled on his side in the middle of the couch, still panting from the afternoon play session. Bye, Sonny, Kyle said, petting the dog and giving him a gentle kiss on the muzzle. Then he hopped up and ran to me for a hug. Have a good weekend, Dad, he said, squeezing me tightly. I love you. I love you too, I replied. He took Whitney's hand, and she led him to the door. Have a good weekend, Luke, Whitney said. You too, I replied, and then, unable to hold back, added, super lawyer. She froze and turned over her shoulder to look at me. The expression on my face must have confirmed her worst fears because she sagged, nodded, and led Kyle to her car. 4 hours and 3 beers later, I had gathered some important insights. First, Whitney had lied. She had been with him on several occasions. Second, he was clearly a lawyer, as evidenced by the email address CLD Law. Third, I found a law firm in nearby Sherman Oaks named Cahill, Levine, and Dunleavy, which had 9 lawyers, 7 of whom were men. There was no email address listed on their website. Fourth, he had pursued her persistently, and it took months for Whitney to finally succumb to his advances. Fifth, despite his attempts, she had never reconnected with him after her email from March 20th. Sixth, with the exception of the occasional comments about how I didn't seem to care for her feelings, there was no indication of what I had done wrong. None of Whitney's emails had said anything negative about me. In fact, I felt more like an afterthought in all but her March 20th email, which read more like a fond memory, similar to a nostalgic look back at a happy childhood moment. However, there were still unanswered questions. Who was he? Neither of them had addressed or signed their messages. What had sparked this situation? Sure, he chased her, but I had no idea if she had sent any signals that she was available. When did I go from being Whitney's husband and the love of her life to just a fond memory? When did she stop loving me, and why? What had I done wrong? It was almost 11, and I was ready for bed when a thought occurred to me. I decided to check it out. I logged back into the secret email account and clicked on the history. Sure enough, they were all deleted, except for one unopened message in the inbox. The content line simply read, Luke, I'm so sorry. I left the message unopened, clicked off the internet, and went to bed. I felt a mix of frustration and resolve. Let her wonder if I had read them. By 9:30 Saturday morning, I was climbing the walls with boredom. Poor Sonny had already been walked around the block multiple times. I had read both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and my grapefruit and toast breakfast took only 10 minutes. With nothing to do until the stores opened at 10, I thought about going to the park. Come on, Sonny, I said, but he seemed determined to ignore me. I'll carry you, I promised, finally catching him and holding him under one arm while I grabbed his little crate with the other. He looked somewhat appeased when I placed his crate on the passenger seat and then put him inside before heading to the driver's side. By the time the car started moving, Sonny was already snoring. 5 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of Veterans Park. A few people were there, some jogging along the paths, while others pushed their children on the swings. Let's go, buddy, I said, rousing the pup and holding him in my arms. We strolled leisurely around the park, and Sonny seemed content to lay in my arms, giving sleepy looks to passing joggers. The warm morning air felt good, much better than sitting in the living room, staring at walls and listening to silence. As we neared the swing set and the cheerful sounds of children playing, Sonny's ears perked up, and he pushed himself up in my arms, searching for the source of the excitement. Once he spotted the kids, he started yipping, his tiny curled tail wagging rapidly against my chest. I was smiling at Sonny when I noticed her. She looked up and saw me at about the same time, and I froze. "Hey, Kristen," she called, waving as she pushed a little boy, who was around Kyle's age, on the swing. I lifted my hand in greeting, watching her for a moment. She seemed relaxed and easygoing with the boy, enjoying the simple pleasure of pushing him on the swing. I envied both her demeanor and the companionship she shared with her child. After a few minutes, the little boy jumped off the swing, tumbled through the grass, and got up with a bright smile. "Can I see your puppy, mister?" he asked, running up to me with a lopsided grin. "Sure," I said, bending down to release Sonny from my arms. "His name's Sonny." "I know," the boy replied, petting the dog, who was clearly enjoying the attention far more than my company. "What's that saying?" Kristen asked as she walked over. "Something about snails and puppy dogtails? That's what little boys are made of." "I don't remember," I admitted. "Me neither," she said, smiling sympathetically. "It takes some getting used to, huh?" "Yeah, I'm noticing that," I replied. She bent down to pet Sonny, who was still focused on the more boisterous attention from the boy. "So, this is 2 Saturdays in a row, Luke. Are you stalking me?" she joked. "Just killing time until the store's open," I mumbled, deciding to change the subject. "Your son, Ben?" "Yeah," she replied, her eyes on him the whole time. "So, you're in the same boat as me." She turned to me with a neutral expression. "Pretty much. But at least it's your weekend, right?" She shook her head. "I'm dropping him off at his dad's house in about 20 minutes. I nodded, unsure of how much more to ask. She was beautiful and seemed nice, and my loneliness made me want to get to know her better. "What are your plans for the rest of the weekend?" she asked, interrupting my thoughts. "Furniture shopping," I said. "Really? A man furniture shopping?" she chuckled. "I'd pay to see that." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Her eyes narrowed, and I could sense her playful mood. My words trailed off, and I felt a bit embarrassed. Her smile returned. "So you're asking for help with furniture shopping, and in exchange, I get lunch?" Before I could say anything, she answered her own question. "Okay, Professor," she said. "Sounds like a plan. I'll buy lunch." I offered. I insisted. She shook her head. "No." I opened my big mouth, and you called me on it. "Fair's fair. A woman of my word." I smiled, glad for the company on what would have been an otherwise empty and miserable day. "So where do you live?" she asked. "Winston Hill, house number 715. She glanced at her watch, then at Ben and Sonny. "How about I take Ben out to his dad's house and meet you back at your place in about half an hour? I can take a quick tour of the house, get an idea of what you need, and then we'll go look at some things." "Sounds like a plan," I agreed, wondering how much time I'd have for a quick cleaning before she arrived. 30 minutes, she said, holding her hand out for Ben. "Come on, honey. Time to get you off to Dad's." I scooped up the pug and followed them to the parking lot. While the house wouldn't pass a West Point inspection, it was clean enough for a normal human being. "You're right," Kristen said, leaning against the door frame and looking into my empty bedroom. "You definitely need furniture." I shrugged. "Where the hell do you sleep?" "A sofa in the den," I replied. "It's a hide-a-bed." "That must be comfortable," she snorted. 3 hours later, our furniture shopping was almost complete. Contrary to my initial fears, Kristen's selections for me, though I can't pretend I had a major say in any of it, were tasteful and masculine. At least there were no floral prints, and the colors were mostly browns and burgundy. "Okay," she said as we left the Lazy Boy store. "Recliners, entertainment center, dresser, coffee tables, and end tables are all taken care of. Just the bed left. Want to go back to Bergner?" "Sleep comfort," she replied. "Pricey but worth it." So off we went to look at adjustable beds, something I had never even heard about. "Lay on this one," she said, sprawling across one side of a massive king-sized bed. I sprawled on the other side. "Comfy but a little soft," I remarked. "Then watch this," the sales lady said, pressing a button on a remote control. I heard a whirring sound, and a minute later, the bed became firm. Cool, huh? Kristen asked, her head turned toward me with a big grin on her face. Very, I agreed. But what about the king size? Can't I just go with a smaller one? Not a chance, she insisted. Then her face softened. You're going to find someone else again, Luke. You really will. I nodded, and her grin returned. And when you do, she continued, you don't want her taking up too much space on the bed, right? I grinned back. Right. Let's take it, she said, hopping off the bed. I laid there for a moment, thinking how I'd almost preferred the smaller bed. The one that would be more cozy. You'll need a headboard, she added. This comes with its own bed frame, but you'll need to either make or have someone else make a headboard, or you can buy a king-size bed frame and just put this inside of it, the sales lady suggested. Kristen shook her head. Tyler's dad still does woodworking. He can build you something that will be ready by the time this is delivered. Tyler's dad? I said, surprised. My ex-father-in-law? He'll know how big to make it. He's already done a few of them, she said. I'm sure the measurements haven't changed. I nodded, agreeing that was fair enough. We spent the next 10 minutes filling out the delivery instructions and paying for the new bed. Before I really knew it, we were standing in the hallway of the mall, where people were rushing by us. We were done. My house was pretty much furnished in a little over 3 hours. Lunch? I suggested. Something light? I'll buy, she offered. I'm not that hungry, I insisted. Me neither. Still, if we don't eat something, we'll be starving in an hour or two. Kristen looked me up and down as if appraising a racehorse. She seemed to make up her mind about something, and then gave me a grin as she hooked her arm into mine. Come on, hero, she said, pulling me along. I think I know just the place. 15 minutes later, we parked outside a small bakery on Grant City's main drag. How did I never notice this place before? I asked, getting out of the car. You're not from here, she said, leading me into the tiny bakery. It's a well-kept secret. A plump woman with steel gray hair, glasses, and a white smock with a matching apron smiled and leaned toward us from behind the counter as we approached. 5 minutes later, we were seated at a tiny table in the corner, nibbling on fresh croissants and sipping hot espresso. How did I ever miss this place? I asked, marveling at the delicious pastries. Kristen grinned. I told you. You've got to grow up here to find these little out-of-the-way cubbyholes. So why don't you tell me about yourself? I asked, trying to keep my eyes on her as we spoke. What do you want to know? She replied, smiling easily. I met her gaze. I mean, I know you're a teacher, and I know you have a little boy. But I also know you were married to a writer, Tyler Collins. Yeah, Tyler Collins was my first husband. My second husband was a cop, and that one didn't last very long. I raised an eyebrow. Ben is Tyler's son? Yep, Tyler's my first husband. Randy was the cop, but we didn't have any kids together, she said with a slight chuckle. That marriage barely lasted long enough to unwrap the wedding presents. Over the next half hour, while walking the main drag together, Kristen shared more about her life. How she had gone through 2 husbands, how she'd grown lonely and impatient, and how she had eventually left Tyler in Florida to return to Illinois. She married Randy, who ended up being Tyler's son. After getting dumped by Randy, she had begged Tyler for a second chance, but he married his editor instead. She spent the past 5 years raising her son and going on occasional dates. Questions? She asked when she finished, her voice soft and resigned. I stopped and turned to look at her. This isn't an interrogation, Kristen. I know. It's just that. I mean, I've made some real major mistakes. Some mistakes that have hurt a lot of people. Not just Tyler and Randy, but also their families and mine. Did you do it to hurt them? I asked. She shrugged. Doesn't really make any difference, does it? The point is that I did hurt them. Because of me, they all suffered. Why I did it doesn't really matter. It just matters that I did it. And you don't think that they're even a little bit at fault for any of this? You think Tyler, and especially Randy, aren't at fault at all? Tyler, maybe a little, she said, pausing to consider. Not really, though. I really put him in an impossible position. Randy, quite a bit more. But still, none of it would have happened without me. If I'd had my head on straight and had thought it through better, I'd like to think I wouldn't have done it. But I'm pretty sure I would have, at least then. She shook her head. Not a chance. What's different? I asked, surprised by my own question. That's all, she replied, resuming her walk. Of course, that's all. Luke, come on. You've got Kyle. You know what I mean. Do you think you'd ever do something like that if it meant putting him through all of this again? If he had to go through a second divorce? I didn't want him to go through the first divorce. No, she said, her tone reflective. If I'd known I was pregnant, I'd have never left. I would have come clean with Tyler and begged him to forgive me, and I would have spent the rest of my life trying to hold my family together. Do you think he'd have forgiven you? I asked. I'd like to think he would have, she replied. He was always a great guy. Still is. You sound like you're still in love with him. Sure, why not? He's Ben's father, and he's a great guy. But he's moved on. He has a new wife now, and they have a little girl of their own. So, yeah, I still love him. But it's really a fond love, a comfortable love, not a burning passion. I gave that up. Our ship has sailed, and even if it came back to port, I couldn't get on again. I was silent, and she didn't say anything else until we were in the car, driving back to my place. Penny for your thoughts, she said. I don't know, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. I just can't help but think that maybe Whitney, she's my ex, didn't really think this all through. I don't know, Kristen said, placing her hand on my forearm. It sounds to me like she changed her mind toward the end. Like she wanted to do what I wish I'd had the chance to do. Beg for forgiveness, and try to spend the rest of her life making it up to you. I shot a glance at Kristen, then back to the road. There's just one thing missing, I said. I know she didn't want to have to come clean in the process. Bingo. We pulled into the driveway beside her car, and I shut off the engine. Luke, Kristen said, turning to me, if she'd come clean, if she told you everything up front, would you have forgiven her? I thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Guess we'll never know. I had asked Kristen to dinner that night, but she begged off to spend time with her folks. She promised to call me the next day sometime, and I told her I'd be there. So, my first Saturday night alone consisted of puppy chow for Sunu and a bowl of soup for me, 5 episodes into the Band of Brothers box set. After putting the pup in his crate, I returned to the couch and fell asleep. One of the worst parts about growing older is my inability to sleep much more than 6 hours a night. As a teenager, most of my weekends were spent in bed until almost 11 o'clock. At West Point, of course, that changed dramatically. I was up by 4:30 every morning. That's really early for those of you not acquainted with military time. The rest of my time in the Army was similarly spent in snatches of sleep. After the Army, I enjoyed sleeping until at least 8 or 9 most weekend mornings and managed at least 8 hours of sleep nearly every night. Now, when I most needed to escape the unbearable emptiness of the house, you'd think I could sleep. Not a chance. So there I was at 5:30, walking a clearly irritated puppy around the block for the 4th time. A few hundred yards into the 5th trip, a tall, elderly man in pajamas and a bathrobe was waiting for me on his front porch. You shouldn't do that, he called out. I stopped and turned to him. Do what? He nodded down at the wheezing puppy. Walk him so much or so fast. Sunu's a pug, and you know this, I thought. The man smiled patiently. Because it's what I do. I'm a vet. I looked down at Sunu and then back at the man on the porch. Scooping the dog into my arms, I walked to the front porch. Sorry, I said. I didn't mean to be rude or anything. He looked at me for a moment, then to the dog, now snuggled in my chest. Alan Leroy, he said, reaching over to pet the puppy. He was about 70, tall and gaunt, bald with a gray, cropped ring of hair and reading glasses. His forearms, though, belied his age. They looked like bands of steel. Luke Patterson, I responded. Pugs have a shortened, soft palate, he explained, looking at me as he spoke. So they're not good at breathing. It's why they snore so loud and pant so much, especially in hotter weather. They get winded and overheated real easy, so you need to keep an eye on him in this weather. Make sure he gets plenty of water when you get him home, and you may want to check out the pads of his paws. They're probably swollen pretty bad. Ice them. But I only walked him 4 times around the block today, I said. I know. I counted. You walked him for nearly an hour yesterday, probably 2.5, maybe 3 miles. I saw that too while I read my papers near the front window. You'll hurt him sure as you keep it up. I nodded, terrified of what I'd nearly done. I didn't know. He smiled. Most first-time pet owners don't have a clue. Someone should have told you, but they didn't. So now I'm telling you. He scratched Sunu behind the ears. Water first thing when you get him home, and you'd best carry him there. See how he's already panting? He can't keep going. But he was also looking up at me with adoring eyes, and to my eternal shame, love and happiness radiated from him. Promise, I said. Okay, Luke Patterson. Just thought you should know. Next time you walk him, keep him close to your side. If he tries pulling ahead, give him a little tug back. You've got a harness collar here, so you won't hurt him. Just show him who's boss. He chuckled again, then waved and went back into his house. I walked back home, got Sunu a big bowl of fresh cold water, and put him down. He drank nearly half the bowl in no time, and his panting started to subside. Sorry, boy, I said, petting him when he was done. He wagged his tail and then went to the living room, curling up in the middle of the floor. I, on the other hand, spent the next hour getting over the shakes that had overcome me. Christ, how would I have explained to KY why Sunu was dead? As if enough wasn't going wrong in his life, he came inches from having me kill his dog. Jesus Christ. By 9, I decided to go grocery shopping. Do you have any idea how bored you have to be before grocery shopping actually becomes the highlight of your day? I was in the produce aisle when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Heather Farley, she said, reaching in and swatting the zucchini from my hands. Don't buy that, Professor. It's gross. I looked at her and laughed. Good morning, Miss Farley. She gave a bright smile, as did the shorter brunette next to her. Morning, Professor Patterson, she intoned in mock schoolgirl fashion. Okay, fine. We're not in class. Call me Luke. And you'll call me Heather, she said. And me Brandy, the other girl added. Fair enough. I turned back to the zucchini. So what's so gross about zucchini? Not zucchini, Heather replied. Just that zucchini. Okay, I'll bite. What's wrong with that zucchini? She looked at me like I was hopeless. It's low quality, grown with pesticides and insecticides, picked before it's ripe, and ripened with gases. It's transported from who knows where, and it's probably old. Get the picture? Okay, and my alternative is? Dude, Brandy chimed in. Look around you. You're in the breadbasket of the Midwest. Drive down any road, and within 5 miles, you'll find farm stands all over the place. They'll be better, fresher, and taste better. I looked from Brandy to Heather and back again. They seemed like 2 peas in a pod, with a passion for long, enthusiastic explanations. Melons are in season, Heather said, then flashed me a playful look. Same farm stands usually have meat, too. Heather glanced at Brandy, and they nodded almost in unison. Sure, you can buy your meat here, but not your bread. There's this bakery on Winstead Street. You know the one? I nodded. Just went there yesterday for the first time. They nodded knowingly. That's your best bet. Come on, Heather said. Follow us. We'll help. I'm pretty sure I can take it from here, I protested. Yeah, right, Brandy snorted, rolling her eyes at Heather, who rolled her eyes back in response. So I spent the next half hour being guided around the grocery store, buying almost nothing except milk, coffee, pasta, meat, and frozen vegetables, only if those vegetables were out of season. Strangely, it was fun. Heather and Brandy were a pair of chatterboxes, talking almost nonstop about classes, professors, boys, and the like. Once through the checkout lane and into the parking lot, Heather turned to me. So, you want to follow us to some farm stands? I smiled. No thanks. I'm pretty sure I can handle it from here, and this time I meant it. Heather batted her eyelashes at me. What's wrong, Professor? Afraid of being left alone with the 2 of us for too long? Yeah, Professor, Brandy joined in, putting an arm around Heather's waist and pulling her close. Don't think you can handle it. I felt a rush of embarrassment and excitement. I tried to stammer, and they both started giggling. Okay then, Heather said, flashing a grin that suggested mischief. But if you change your mind, you've got my email. An hour later, fully loaded up with fresh bread, croissants, and some vegetables from a farm stand 2 miles out of town, I was back in my kitchen unloading my morning haul. There were no messages, and I felt a bit disappointed. The phone finally rang when I finished putting the groceries away. I was wondering when you would call, I answered. There was silence, then Whitney spoke. Oh, you were, expecting someone? I deflated. Yeah, sort of. What's up? I was wondering if I could bring Kay back today instead of tomorrow like we planned. Something wrong? She hesitated, then answered, well, he's pretty bored, and he misses his puppy too. And well, I've got a pretty big trial starting on Tuesday, and I'm thinking of getting an early start on final trial prep. I thought about it for a moment, wondering if this would mess up any potential plans Kristen might have. Sorry, I said. When were you thinking of bringing him back? I looked up. It wasn't even 11 yet. Sure, that's fine. Whenever. I'll be here. Thanks, Luke, she said. Then after a slight pause, she added, I hope I'm not messing up something for you. I'll deal with it, I said. See you soon. I hung up. No goodbye. No I love you. Just hung up. Kristen called just after Whitney dropped Kyle off. He was in the backyard playing with Sunu when the phone rang. Hello. Morning, Luke. Christ, I said. Good morning to you. So, do you have any plans for today? I sighed. Whitney just brought Kay back a day early. She laughed. Welcome to it. Might as well get used to it. This happens to you a lot. No, not a lot, she said. Sometimes, though. And sometimes I use Tyler as a babysitter if I have a date or something. I pondered this, wondering how often she had dates. You there? She asked. Yeah, still here. Do you still want to get out of the house today? You got something in mind? I do, actually, she said. Think you can handle being around my ex-husband and his new wife? Say again? She laughed. Tyler invited me out to his house for a cookout, a Labor Day party. I mentioned I might bring a date, and he said fine. Yeah, I said, but Kyla's welcome to come along. Then we'll be there, along with at least a dozen other kids, and Tyler's got a pool they can play in. And you won't be uncomfortable? No, she answered. This doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough that everyone's pretty comfortable with the situation. I mean, we're not all best buds or anything, but we get along and put up that front for Ben. We still have a ton of mutual friends, so it's not really all that uncomfortable anymore. I looked out at Kyle, realizing Sunu was already tiring and needed a nap. I figured I had nothing better on my plate. Plus, I wanted to see Kristen in a swimsuit. So do I bring swim trunks? She laughed. If you want to swim, you're bringing a swimsuit. I guess you'll just have to come along and find out, won't you? An hour later, with swim trunks and towels for Kyle and me packed in a duffel bag, we picked up Kristen in front of a small, neat house with perfectly maintained landscaping and a flawless lawn. She opened the door before I could ring the doorbell. Come in for a sec, she said. You can help me carry the beans and some stuff? Was I supposed to bring something? I asked, following her through a cozy living room into a tiny galley-style kitchen. She was dressed in shorts and a sleeveless button-up blouse, and I appreciated the view of her smooth, toned legs. Not really, she said, unplugging a crock pot on the counter and nodding for me to take it. If you want, we'll stop on the way out, and you can get a case of beer or soda or something. Fair enough, I agreed. She scooped up a duffel bag of her own in her purse, turning to me. Sorry, but there's no time for a tour now. Maybe next time? Sure. I looked around one last time before following her out. It's nice, though. Yeah, she agreed. Cozy and not too much. Who does your landscaping? I asked as she opened the back door to my car. She and Kyle exchanged greetings. No one, she said, putting her things down on the back seat. She took the crock pot from my hands and set it on the floor before turning to me. I do it all myself. Keeps me busy when Kay is with his dad. That's real nice, I said, opening her door for her. Thanks, she said with a bright smile as she slid into the seat and buckled her seatbelt. An hour later, I'd met most of the 20 or so adults at the party, including Tyler Collins and his wife Marissa. I was told she was an up-and-coming science fiction author. They were pleasant and easy to talk with. Their home was nice, but not too large or ostentatious. It sat well off the road on a 5-acre parcel surrounded by 100-year-old oak trees. You were in the Army, Tyler said. I nodded. Got out in '92. What did you do? Marissa asked. She was pretty in a tall, gangly sort of way, her smile easy yet sly and half-hidden. She didn't seem to speak much, but when she did, it was direct and to the point. "Infantry," I said. "Platoon leader." She nodded, and Kristen spoke up. "Kay told the class he's some kind of war hero." Tyler raised an eyebrow at that. "Hero? I forgot to duck," I answered. "That Kuwait and Iraq thing. Desert Storm?" "That's the one," I confirmed. "Gulf War." "Did you see battle?" Marissa asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "And you did something heroic?" "No more than I was supposed to do." Marissa's sly smile returned, and she fixed me with a stare. "Are we going to have to torture you to get the story out of you?" I felt their stares, knowing they wanted me to tell them some grand tale of valor and honor, but I knew they wouldn't understand. None of them had been there. You had to have been there. Marissa sensed my hesitation, though, and let me off the hook. "You could learn something, Tyler," she said, still looking at me. "And what's that, dear?" "Sometimes it's best to keep certain things to yourself." He laughed. "I'm what? An open book?" I watched them, concerned about a potential flare-up, but her sly smile was now directed at him, coupled with a softness in her eyes that showed she loved him just the way he was. His confidence in receiving that look, knowing her devotion to him, was also visible in his easy stroking of her arm. "Not you, Tyler, in your characters. Hold some things back. Let the readers wonder what the secrets are, and don't spill them all at the end." He nodded at this, looking from Marissa to Kristen to me, then his grin nearly split his face. "My harshest critic." "So," Kristen said in the lull, "anyone going into the pool?" "Are you?" Marissa asked me. When I hesitated, Kristen flashed me a devilish grin. "I'm only going in if you're going in." I looked at Tyler and Marissa, both of whom had lopsided grins on their faces, then back to Kristen. I really did want to see her in that swimsuit, and assuming we were going to become at least friends, I decided I was only putting off the inevitable. "Where do I change?" I asked. "Follow me," Kristen replied, taking my hand and smiling. "If you're not out in 5 minutes, Tyler said, grinning and raising his eyebrows. "He wishes." Kristen snorted back at Tyler. "He can use Ben's room. I'll use the hallway bathroom." "Spoil sport," Marissa chided. 5 minutes later, towel wrapped around my waist, I walked back to the rear lawn of the house. "You have the widest legs I've ever seen," Kristen said. "Like a ghost," someone next to Tyler added. "Why the towel?" Marissa asked. "You wearing Speedos or something?" I looked from her to Kristen to the others, then took the towel away from my waist. They tried not to gasp or look shocked, but none of them managed to totally control their surprise. "Like I said," I explained, looking down at the jagged lines of scar tissue rising above the suit from my right hip down nearly to my knee. "I forgot to duck." Kristen leaned in closer and reached out her fingertips, tracing the angry, knotted lines of scarring above my waistband. "I'd rather you didn't do that just now," I said softly. "Something's liable to pop up in a most embarrassing manner." The tension broke, and everyone laughed. Tyler offered to let us go back inside and take some more time changing if that was the case, while others suggested a corner of the pool away from the children. Though Kristen seemed to take it all in stride, I felt myself beginning to blush. "Oh look," Tyler laughed. "Looks like someone's got a crush on someone." "Tyler," Marissa warned, giving him a glance. "Sorry," he said, still chuckling. "Go on, you two. Keep an eye on the kids for a while, and we'll start grilling." "Sure you don't want some help?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope. Just go have some fun." After a half hour in the pool, mostly spent avoiding being splashed or jumped on by a dozen kids of all ages, Kristen and I were sitting on the concrete slab with our feet dangling in the water. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her eyes on the kids. "No. The warm water feels pretty good, actually." "Is that why Kyle says you're a war hero?" "No," I said, turning to look at her. His mom told him that the first time he saw the scars, he wanted to know what they were. "Does he know what they're from?" "He knows as much as you do." "Does anyone else?" "I mean, besides Whitney, of course, and probably your folks and whoever was there when it happened." "No, you've about covered it, except I never told my folks." Understanding how quiet I kept the matter, She was tentative with her next questions. So, are you a hero? Tough to define, don't you think? She turned and fixed me with a stare. Did the army define it that way? I stared back, then nodded. Yeah, I got my medal for it. Medals? If you count the Purple Heart. Which one did you get? Silver Star. Is that a big deal? I shrugged. Sure, third highest one they give out. She gave me a smile and a raised eyebrow. So I guess you really are a hero then, huh? I chuckled. No, like I said, just too stupid to get down. I watched her face move closer, and I froze, my eyes going wide. She kissed me, not a passionate kiss, not really even a romantic kiss, just a light brushing of her lips against mine. Whatever you call it, though, it was electric and over before I could respond. Then reality hit, and I looked around. No one else had seen it, including Kyle. Don't worry, she whispered. He wasn't looking. I smiled, glad she understood and didn't mistake my reaction for rejection. I always wanted to kiss a hero, Luke Patterson, she said. I felt a giddiness in my belly, a lightness that hadn't been there in a long time. Is that all you ever wanted to try with a hero? The words were out of my mouth before I could check them. Her grin turned downright flirtatious at that. Maybe if it's the right hero. You know, not just any old hero. So there are a lot of those around here to pick from? Heroes, that is? She laughed. Good point. By 6:30, I was beginning to worry about little Sonny. Sure, he'd sleep 20 hours a day when Kyle wasn't around, but he still needed to eat. Add to that a belly full of chicken, beans, and potato salad, and I was also ready to just crash and relax. But Dad, Kyle protested, Ben wants me to spend the night. I looked at Kristen, who shrugged. Just then, Marissa came over. Sorry, she said. Ben asked a couple of hours ago, and it's okay with us if it's okay with you. I looked from her to Kyle, then to little Ben, who was standing impatiently and expectantly 10 feet back. Then back to Marissa. Okay, I didn't know them from Adam, but how dangerous can two authors really be? You're sure it's not a problem? She smiled. Really? Ben wants him to stay, and we've got plenty of room. What time should I pick him up tomorrow? I asked, at which point, Kyle gave a whoop of joy, and Ben pumped his fist. Kristen chuckled, and Marissa grinned. We'll drop him off at your place probably at about noon. Thanks, I said, which she waved off before giving me a hug and thanking me for coming. I took 5 minutes to lecture Kyle on manners, being on his best behavior, and all the other things my parents always lectured me about when staying at someone's house for the first time. He spent those 5 minutes rolling his eyes, waiting for me to finish so he could get back in the pool. Most of the drive back to town was spent in comfortable silence. It became a lot more relaxed when Kristen grabbed my free hand and placed it on her thigh, down near her knee. I shot her a look, but she was just staring straight ahead with a smile playing on her lips. So, do you want to get a drink somewhere before you drop me off? She asked. Sounds nice, I replied. Can I drop by the house and feed Sonny first and let him out of his cage for a few minutes? Sure. 5 minutes later, Sonny was out of the cage and scampering around the backyard, sniffing every blade of grass before lifting his leg and claiming it as his domain. Got a beer? Kristen asked from beside me on the deck. Sure, I said, going to the fridge and grabbing a couple of bottles of Amstel Light. I popped the caps and returned with one ice-cold beer for the lovely lady. She took a long pull from the beer. Something wrong? I asked. Just getting my courage up for what? She took another long pull from the beer, then gave a tiny burp and giggled. Sorry, I snickered, then took a long pull from my own beer. You need some courage too? She asked. I don't know yet. I just figured if you needed some, then maybe I'd better get some too. Oh, really? Really? Then let's see if either of us needed the liquid courage, she said, putting her beer bottle on the railing. She turned to face me, then shot a look at my beer bottle. Does this mean that I started, my eyes on her as I set my beer down. She nodded and stepped closer, leaning in to kiss me. No slight brushing of the lips this time. This was the real thing. It was a gentle kiss that gradually became deeper, her hands softly running through my hair as I wrapped my arms around her. I savored the moment, and after about a minute, she broke the kiss and looked at me. Thanks. I think that should be the other way around, I murmured. That was nice. Amazing, actually. She smiled a happy smile, not the kind that hinted she had ulterior motives. So, did I pass the test? I asked. She searched my face, looking for hidden meanings in my words, which there weren't. Then she gave me a light peck on the cheek. It's not an audition. It's something I've wanted to do since last week. Then why didn't you? Because I didn't know if I liked you enough. I nodded, recalling our earlier conversation. We have kids now. No sense in rushing into something that may only hurt them. She nodded, relieved at my understanding. I'm sorry if you want more now, but I just can't take that chance. Sleeping together too soon just complicates things. It makes people, I don't know, it just changes things. I understand, I said. It can make them possessive. She looked thoughtful, her lips narrowing, her eyes staring off to the side. Did I say something wrong? She turned to me and smiled, but it looked forced. I decided to address her sudden anxiety. You know, I whispered, just being the first one after my divorce doesn't mean you'll ever be a rebound. If we play this right, and assuming we don't end up hating each other in a few months, there's no reason we can't become best friends before we become more. And if that's in the cards, then so be it. If it's not, though, it won't have anything to do with you being a rebound or anything. Her eyes sparkled with tears, but her smile told me I'd said just the right thing. Goddamn, you're smart. No wonder you're a professor, she said, leaning in and kissing me again. This kiss lasted longer than the first, only ending when Sonny decided to announce his presence by yelping and bouncing up and down at our feet. Ouch, I said, breaking the kiss. What just nipped my ankle? She laughed, then picked up her beer and took a sip. Let's get him fed and go have that drink. Good plan, I agreed. At 11:30 the next morning, Kyle bounded through the front door and made a beeline straight for Sonny, who was equally excited to see his big brother. They romped together out to the backyard. Hello, I heard someone call. I walked from the kitchen to the living room and saw Tyler Collins standing in the doorway. Just wanted to make sure someone was home, he said. Come on in. Have a beer or a pop or something. He smiled, shrugged, and stepped in, closing the door behind himself. Did he behave? I asked. Sure, he said. They had a blast. He may need a nap, though. Sorry, but they didn't fall asleep on the couch until almost midnight. I chuckled. The joys of sleepovers. Name your poison, I said, opening the refrigerator so he could see inside. Just a Diet Pepsi, please. I pulled out two and handed one to him. He popped it open, took a drink, then placed it on the counter, leaning casually against it. So, what's it like being a best-selling author? I asked, searching for a change in topic. For one, it's busier than you'd think. There's the writing, then the editing, and more editing. That's after I come up with the story idea and research it, of course. And while all that's going on, there are consultations on movie scripts if it sells, book tours, talk shows, and all the rest of the stuff that goes into selling a book. Sounds pretty hectic. Way more hectic than I'd have ever guessed, he confirmed. He took another sip and then said, And you? The life of a history professor? 9 hours a week in class. Maybe 18 hours a week on average preparing for classes and grading exams and term papers. Another 9 hours a week of office hours to meet one-on-one with students and a couple of hours a week for faculty meetings. That's not so bad, he observed. Then, I added, there's the inevitable research and writing we do on our own, usually with help from student interns for research and editing. You know, stuff for historical journals and the occasional small press book. And that's how much more time a week? Maybe 15 hours. Okay, he said, holding up his hands. It's now officially reached borderline hectic and too much. I shrugged. It's not so bad. I can do a lot of the work from home, class preparation and writing, and it doesn't really matter what time I do it, especially now that, he looked at me, heard my words, and saw the look on my face. He finished my sentence in his head, then said, Yeah, that's how I got started writing. The story continues in the following video. The link to the continuation is in the description of this video. Thanks for watching.